Okay, guys, welcome to my channel. Um, yeah, I'm back with my new certificate. That was AWS Developer Associate. So I usually do a review after a test, and this is just as it is. So today I'm gonna talk about how was the test and what was my expectation and how I cope with it. And yeah, let's start. So one important thing I just want to make sure in the beginning is that um, when you go for a test in AWS developer, uh, it's not like just an programming certificate. So this is very important to understand because I see people asking me that, hey, how was the developer? And I'm not very well in coding and programming and things like that. But if you only think about the certificate, if you only think about how the AWS developer role functioning, I would say that it's not an usual programming certificate, but uh, it will judge your competence in AWS services. So you don't need to expect to write or test any code in this test. The three basic things what AWS actually mentioned, that understanding of core AWS services, uses and basic AWS architecture best practices, proficiency in developing, deploying and debugging cloud-based applications, and uh, ability to use the AWS Service API, AWS CLI and SDK. So uh, I would say it not how you should do it, like how you should program, how you should write code, but rather than what you should do. Let's say these are the services available, and this is the problems. So how you make a solutions, how you implement different services to solve the problem. So it's more like what you should do rather than how you do it, how you write a code, and how you program. Um, so, and of course, I'm talking about the taste. Of course, when you're working in a real life scenario, you need to know how to code and how to develop. So that is the AWS Developer Associate test, if you think about it. But this is interesting because if you look at the AWS exam guide, they usually have a 30% domain on development with AWS services. That makes sense because this is the main part of the certificate. Is I mean that, let's say, let you take an example of CloudFormation, for example. So there is CloudFormation template where you need to write codes in the template so that it can be deployed. So here basically you don't really need to know how to you make the JSON or the template itself, but the concept in a very high level is that what are the different sections, the items, and what are their use cases. And for example, resources is the only section that is mandatory, the other can be optional, and why should you use what and what should be included in which section. That's really important to understand, but not how to write specific codes and not how to implement it just for the test. In the test, there is two types of question. You got multiple choice that I like most because you got only one to choose out of four. But sadly, they have multi-response where there can be two or more right answers. Very confusing. And this is sad for me because let's say there is two or three correct answer, but you choose two of them right and one wrong, and then you lost the whole point. So it's kind of even tough, I would say. And usually they have four or five questions to find out two or three. Uh, but luckily, there's not much like that. Multiple response, I think it's like very few of them are usually multi-response. Usually they are multiple choice. And the good thing is that you don't there is no penalty for the wrong answer. and that's why it is very important that you answer all the question, because you don't get any number for the unanswered questions. um, if the test is hard or difficult, comparing to the solution architect associate, I would say it's hard. It's simply because I had a different I was told that the development is much more easier. So I have an expectation of like, oh, I'll just go and pass and things like that. But it was not like that. Maybe that's why I'm saying that it's harder. And, getting 72% out of, uh, I mean, three answers should be correct out of four. It's not that easy. It's really not that easy. And as I said, the multi-response make it even harder, because you choose two right but one wrong, then you lose all, or one right, one wrong. So yeah, it's not hard, but I would say that you cannot pass the developer test by chance. You cannot just go there and pass somehow. It's not going to happen. What I mean is that you really need to know the services. You really need to know how AWS developers are deploying cost effectively and using the best practices. So that's hard, I would say. One more thing I would say here is that the time is 130 minutes for 65 questions. So it's like 2 minutes per question. And the time is, I would say, it's okay. It's okay, kind of like you never get extra time to, you know, to come back, as I said. But usually people say that, okay, when you are done, you need to come back and check the. But I don't think you are going to get time to come back unless you are very fast. I mean, if we say see 2 minutes per question, so 30 seconds gone to read the question, and then when you start to read the first multiple choice, the first answers, and then you have to go back to the question because you forgot what you read. So you read the answer, no, it doesn't match. Okay, come back to second. It doesn't match, come back to third, and then you really need to understand the question again. So you go back to the question and, okay, is that match with this question 3 and 4? So you see, it's not like that I read the question and I know the answer. It's not like that. It's more like that, to read the question and then you have to match all the answers one by one with the solutions, because it's not like a number which is right, completely right or complete. It's not like provision throughput should be 5. It cannot be 4 or 6. It's not like that. They are like more like you have to understand the question, you have to get the feelings of what can be proper solutions, and then read the answers, and then there might be 2 correct answer, but you have to find the best one. So I would say that 2 minutes is it's okay if you are quite good with comprehension, and if you are already familiar with different services, maybe then you will be quicker to pick up one solution and compare with the question and put it there. So time is of course you need to be very good at time management. So how I prepared, as I said, I was like, oh, it's very easy, I mean, it's simple, nothing. And then so I was overconfident, I would say, and that makes the exam really hard for me. um, I studied for a month, I would say, although I was thinking of this test for a long time, but I never had time to really fix the time and start to study. So it's like a month I was serious about the test, and then I watched some videos and of course courses, some online courses, but I didn't went through from the beginning to end, because I have some already experience working with AWS and the different services. So I just touched the portion that the exam is gonna cover. So you can say 20% or 30% of a course. Maybe I just looked at the developer things like code deploy, code pipelines, elastic beanstalks, or cloud formations, those things which can be more developer specific. And I watched some online videos on those things. And yeah, I discussed with my colleagues about when I have some problems with understanding something, and I discuss. So it's very good to have a discussion before the test, and so you got some ideas. And I did some practice test. Practice test, yeah, you can just buy online or even free. There's online available. I just looked around here and there and see how it feels. And of course, the practice tests help me to realize that I'm not prepared. So if you do a practice test and you are not getting 90%, 95% all the time, you are not prepared. Because I would say you should get 90%. It's simply because you don't have the pressure in a practice test. So it's much more easy. Even though a practice test exam can be harder, but still you don't have any pressure. You just sit there, and sometimes you may finish a practice test in half an hour because you don't have the stress. So that's why I say that in a practice test you should have over expectation 90%, 95%, because in the real test you got the same question maybe, but then pressure coming onto you, it will be very stressful. um, I haven't read any white papers or the frequently asked question thoroughly, but I looked at some frequently asked question because when I was working on some topics, then I get confusion. Then I go back to the, let's say, cloud formation. I was not understanding what the transformation do, or the in the code deploy, I don't understand the spec files. So I go back to the frequently asked question and look at something, and it's give an overall view of the uh, service actually. So for me, uh, frequently asked question, yeah, I did little bit, not all. And white paper, I don't know how much the white paper can help, but I haven't read it. Yeah, but it's always good to be prepared than to fail. Now coming the important part, what the exam covered. So for me, I have a list of things. It's very hard to remember actually after the exam that, and no surprise that I did not remember a single question after the exam. I was like, what was questions? And but anyway, later on I started to memorize one by one when I look at the sources again, and then I make some notes for you guys. So here you go. Elastic load balancer. It has some, there is some use cases. So you have to understand what is the application load balancer, or what is network load balancer, and the classic load balancers. So there is some question about, I think, application load balancer and network, which one you should use. As you already know that classic load balancer is not recommended by AWS anymore. So Elastic Cache, where I have a use case in gaming, and where you have to use the memcached or Redis. So you really need to know in which situation you should use the memcached and the Redis, and what are the benefits of doing so. S3, I got question on encryption, a bucket policy, and you need to remember in the bucket policy that you deny or you allow when you use the condition to control the access. So it's denying that, let's say, if an API calls doesn't include this header in the header, then we deny this. So there was question like allow or deny. So you have to understand the bucket policy, the condition, how that works, and how you do the encryption in REST, in transit. And then you have API gateway. I think I got API gateway. I don't remember the exact question, but it was like how you combine the API gateway in an infrastructural design to deploy a serverless solutions, something like that. So you can already imagine that it was like maybe you have to use Lambda or DynamoDB. Uh, yeah, and I got a question in Lambda. It was dead letter queues. So you know that any Lambda function invoked asynchronously is retried twice before the event is discarded. So if you retrace fail and you unsure why, you have to use the dead letter queues, DLQ, to direct the unprocessed events to an Amazon SQS queue or an Amazon SNS topic to analyze the failure. So this dead letter queue was one of the question. And I got some question from DynamoDB. So when you storing the session data, there was a question like storing session data. So it was a question in the DynamoDB. And also I got question about the partition key. So in some cases you use partition key with the short key to make the combination key, and what is the best one and what you need to consider when you're creating a key. And then I got a question time to live, TTL. And there was a question about the DAX, DynamoDB acceleration. And you have to remember here that DAX and the read replica. So don't mess it up, because read replica is for the RDS and the DAX is for the DynamoDB. So they are trying to make some confusion there, but yeah, you know. And also you need to know the scan versus query. So where you should use scan and where to query, and how to optimize the performance. And there were questions on KMS and how you protect your data in rest and in transit. There were some questions about SQS and where to use the long polling and the short polling. And there was a question in like you have an architecture, you want to you want to decouple the microservices so that they don't depending highly on each other, and of course that is the SQS, I guess. And elastic beanstalk, there was some question in elastic beanstalk, but the elastic beanstalk is not like come directly as a question, but it was attached to some of the questions. So I would say you should have an overall understanding of how elastic beanstalk work. Is the same goes for the CloudFormation. And CloudFormation and elastic beanstalk, I would say those are the two main things was covered in the test, kind of. So you really need to understand every portion, how they works, what are the use cases, what you can include, how you integrate other AWS services with this, which are compatible with them, and so on. And there was some monitoring like X-ray. I got a question from X-ray, I guess. And there were, yeah, I got a question from CloudWatch as well. I don't remember exactly, but you know, CloudWatch, which service is integrated to CloudWatch and which not. So they will try to make you confused. They will tell something completely different, which doesn't have the way to do it in the CloudWatch even. So you need to know in which services you can monitor using the CloudWatch, and where you really need to install the or set up it to monitor the application's performance. And of course, you need to understand the difference between the CloudWatch and CloudTrails and X-ray and Advisor, so that you know actually what's the problem you are trying to solve and how to do that, not using the wrong tools for the wrong device or services. And then there were questions from SAM, serverless application model. And so you need to know the SAM CLI, and there is some deploy and package. So how you use those CLI commands, and some use cases for serverless application models. And usually you should know that it's used basically with the CloudFormation when you want to deploy serverless applications. And some CI/CD tools you need to understand, how the code deploy, code build, and code pipelines works. And especially, there are some files they're going to ask you. Since this is a developer, of course, you need to know the code deploy. You have the AppSpec file, which defines all the parameters needed for the deployment. So you need to know the parameters in the AppSpec files. You don't really need to write or memorize anything, but let's know that what's inside the AppSpec file, what's inside the build spec.yaml file, which is we use in the code build, for example, which build commands and settings which included. And you can override a build spec file from the CLI. So those are the things you really need to remember. Let's say you don't have access to the build spec file, but in that case, you can actually override the file from the CLI. So those small parts of good to remember, I guess. And you need to remember the cognito. There was a question, I think, web identity federation, and it was like an authenticated identity. So user want to log in, but you want to allow the unauthenticated users as well. So what shall you do? So yeah, of course, I mean, there is user pools, but user identity you can use to where you can enable the unauthenticated identities. So it can allows them as well. So that was the basically, and for me, because I was expecting that maybe these tests will require me to understand the different components in AWS services. They really want you to provide the solutions. I mean, where to use which tools, not necessarily how to use them, but where to use which tools, how to be more cost effective, how to use the best practice. So it's more high level knowledge on the AWS services rather than specific development areas. That's what I expected. But anyway, there was no mathematics, no numbers, so no DynamoDB provision throughput, no calculations, not a single numbers. You don't need to remember anything, I guess. Or maybe my test was just different, I don't know. But I don't get any numbers there, so no calculation at all. And my realization is that this test, actually Amazon requires you to have experience. As I said, it's not like that pass by chance. I mean, you just cannot go to a developer test and you just pass it by reading books or I don't know, doing a course. Because it's really need you to know that how things are working, and what are the problems, and what are the new solutions, and how you develop things. So this is my realization. So if you allow me to give some tips, take your time. This is very important. You don't need to hurry up for the test. If you want to pass the test with a good result, I would say you should take your time, understand, realize, do some labs, hands-on practice, play around with all the AWS services, and especially for the developer associate, you should consider the CloudFormation, Elastic Beanstalk, code pipeline, code deploy, code commit, and some security like the IAM roles and users, and it's more on serverless applications. So you need to understand the API gateway, the Lambda functions, and DynamoDB very well, I would say. And some people ask me, shall I do a course? I'm not going to say anything because you are going to do it anyway. I mean, I don't see anyone who go for a AWS certificate and never did a course. So useless. As I said that white paper, it's good to read. I don't know how much it helps, but it helps, of course. But frequently asked questions is most important, I would say, because it helps you realize the problems people facing, and it's real-time solutions you'll get there. And when you read, especially you don't read to all, but I would say S3, DynamoDB, CloudFormation, Stack Beanstalk, Lambda, API, CI/CD tools, those frequently asked questions should be read by you, and it will create overall pictures of those services when you're reading them. And practice test, yes, it can be good, especially when you are not sure that how much knowledge you have, so you can do that. As I said, 90-95% if you are getting, so you are prepared maybe. And I said before, and I'm saying again, that when you do a practice test, this is very important that you read the correct answer and the wrong answer, because sometimes we just mark some answers randomly and they passed through. But if you don't know it was right and this is the reason it was right, then you are not gonna do it again the same way. So that's why it's very important. Every question you answer, doesn't matter right or wrong, you have to go back and read the question again, read the answer. Oh, okay, that's why this is right and that's why that is wrong. So that makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, I mean, practice test is useless. I mean, you just do some practices, you pass it, and then you go to real test, you fail it. So the main reason for practice test is that understanding all the questions and getting a broader knowledge on it. So that's all from my part, guys. I'm really happy to share my experience with you, and I wish you good luck too.